Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. John Searle's Minds, Brains, and Programs is most famous for his introduction of the Chinese room thought experiment, and he actually does call it a Gedanken experiment, the term that's typically used in the older literature for, a hypothesis that is supposed to bear some sort of fruit, not necessarily philosophical, although in this case it definitely is. And it's a rather ingenious way of setting up a way of thinking about what it is that digital computers are presumed to be doing by using a human as an analog for it, and then asking the question, is there really any understanding or other intentional states like thinking going on as we go from the input through the computer and its programming to certain outputs? Can we attribute understanding to the computer that gives good outputs, good in some sort of pragmatic sense of, being able to pass as something that a human writer or speaker would be able to do? So Searle says, all right, let's imagine that I'm locked in a room and I'm given a big batch of Chinese writing. So this is going to be the first batch, and he says, suppose, furthermore, I know no Chinese, either written or spoken, and I'm not even confident I could recognize Chinese writing as Chinese writing distinct from, say, Japanese writing or meaningless squiggles. To me, Chinese writing is just so many meaningless squiggles. So he doesn't know what he's getting. It's just a bunch of arbitrary symbols, right? And so they give him a first batch of Chinese writing coming in from the outside, or perhaps it's already there in the room. And then he says, now, let's make the story more complicated. After this first batch of Chinese writing, I'm given a second batch of Chinese script together, but now there's a twist. I'm given a set of rules for correlating the second batch with the first batch, and I'm told I'm supposed to do this, presumably, right? And those rules are in English, so I can understand how to apply those rules, and I do, in fact, apply those rules to the first two batches of Chinese writing that I'm getting. And then something else happens. He says that suppose I'm given a third batch of Chinese symbols now with some instructions, again in English, and they allow me to correlate elements of this third batch with the first two batches. And the rules in these instructions tell me how to give back certain Chinese symbols with certain sorts of shape in response to certain sorts of shapes given to me in the third batch. So there's been an input, there's been some working with those inputs according to rules that I understand and can apply, and then there's some sort of output. And that output is going to be more Chinese symbols. So he says, I don't actually know what's going on with this, but let's say that the people on the outside have given certain designations to these things. Unknown to me, the people who are giving me all these symbols, they call the first batch a script, they call the second batch a story, and they call the third batch questions. So they give me a script first off, they give me a story, I'm correlating them together according to certain rules that at least I can follow those, but I have no idea what I'm actually operating on. Then they give me a batch of questions in Chinese, and I take the expanded set of rules or instructions, I correlate all these things together, and I output more Chinese symbols to them. And those Chinese symbols are what they call answers to the questions. They also call these various rules that they've given me the program. Now, so far, so good. Searle is going to introduce yet another wrinkle to this that I think often gets left out in discussions about this, but he thinks matters quite a bit. See, he says that to complicate the story a little, imagine that they also give me stories in English. I understand these, and then they ask me questions in English about these stories, and I give them back answers in English. I don't need to do any of this rule applying or anything like that. I can rely on my own brain as a native English speaker. They give me the story, maybe some sort of script, and then they give me a bunch of questions, and I output English language answers, which I understand and seem to make sense. So he says that, okay, we've got that so far. Now, assume that I go back and I'm doing the Chinese operation again, and I'm doing it so long, and they're getting good at refining the things on their end, and presumably the rules have been developed quite well, so that we can get to the point, like he says, that from the point of view of somebody outside of the room, my answers to the questions are absolutely indistinguishable from those of native Chinese speakers. Nobody just looking at my answers can tell I don't speak a word of Chinese. Now, they can also look at my English language answers to the questions, and they would assume that I actually understand English. So maybe they think I'm a bilingual speaker. But in one case, I actually do understand what my answers are and how I get them. In the other case, all I'm doing is manipulating uninterpreted formal symbols. Now, why does he call them uninterpreted formal symbols? Because the English language instructions that I have do not actually tell me how to interpret the Chinese characters that I'm running across. All they tell me is what to do with them. That's not the same thing as interpretation, which itself, although Searle doesn't point this out, we should. Interpretation is also an intentional state or activity, isn't it? So what is he actually getting at here? He says that in the Chinese case, unlike the English case, I produce the answers by this manipulation. As far as the Chinese is concerned, I am behaving just like a computer. I perform computational operations on formally unspecified elements. For the purposes of the Chinese, I am basically just an instantiation of a computer program. So there's an interesting analogy going on here. And we don't necessarily need to use English or Chinese. We could talk about machine language. We could talk about anything that we want to, right? So long as the operator in the middle is working with inputs that they don't really understand, but they understand what to do with them, and they give good outputs that can fool somebody who's looking for those into thinking that there is understanding taking place, the experiment seems to work. So he says, well, the claims made by strong AI are claims that this experiment would bear upon. It would have important implications for it. So what are these claims? Well, One of the claims is that the AI actually does understand the stories that it's being given. We saw a little bit earlier in the article that these could be stories about ordering a hamburger and either leaving without paying or leaving a tip because the hamburger is burned, or being very satisfied with it and paying for the hamburger and paying for the tip. The question is, does the person eat the hamburger? That's not in the story. Since the computer can give an output, yes, it did eat the hamburger, yes, it didn't eat the hamburger, we say, yes, there's understanding going on there. And Searle says, no. It's clear that in the Chinese room, the human does not understand Chinese. This is baked into the very structure of the thought experiment. So to say that because they have the right rule book and can manipulate things in such a way as to give good outputs doesn't mean that understanding is somehow being generated or taking place. So if that's the case for the human being, that's also the case for the supposed artificial intelligence, right? He says Schrank's computer understands nothing of any stories, whether in Chinese, English, or whatever. Since in the Chinese case, the computer is me, and in cases where the computer is not me, the computer has nothing more than I have in the case where I understand nothing. Okay, so that's one important claim dealt with. The second claim is that the AI program, the way it's set up, in some sense explains human understanding, what human understanding actually is. And here's where Searle goes into a little bit more detail. He says it does not explain anything remotely like that. It doesn't provide sufficient conditions of understanding. So what needs to, or what would have to be, not what would have to be the case, rather what being the case would allow understanding to be properly attributed to it. So we don't have sufficient conditions of understanding, and the program, there is no understanding. We also don't have a necessary condition, what has to be the case in order for there to be understanding, or even, he says, a significant contribution to understanding. And so he goes on and he says, one of the claims made by supporters of strong AI is that when I understand a story in English, what I'm doing is exactly the same as what I was doing in manipulating the Chinese symbols. It's just like on a higher level, or I'm used to doing it. But really, all that understanding is just formal symbol manipulation. And Searle says, no, it's not. Where are you getting this from? This has not been demonstrated, right? And so he says the plausibility the claim has at all derives from the supposition we can construct a program that will have the same inputs and outputs as native speakers. And he's going to go on and say, somebody might come back and say, perhaps the program, it's not the whole story about what human understanding is, but maybe it's part of the story, right? Maybe some of what we do is like the Chinese room. We get inputs, we have rules in our head that we operate with, and then we output something. And he says, well, that would be an empirical question, what he calls an empirical possibility. Him calling it a possibility shows that he thinks that it's at a pretty low level. Anything is possible. But there's no reason being provided for why we should buy into that being the case, right? He says, what is suggested, certainly not demonstrated, by the example, and here's the biggest problem, winds up being irrelevant to the understanding of a story. This sort of thing, even if it's got good outputs, isn't understanding, right? So this is a pretty ingenious way of setting up a set of pretty significant problems for people who want to make strong claims about artificial intelligence and intentional states that we know that human beings definitely have. And we could be, kind of wondering whether computers could ever have anything remotely like this. And so, he's going to go on and say, no reason, whatever, has been offered to suppose that, these formal principles that we put into a computer are necessary or even contributory, because no reason has been given to suppose that when I understand English, I'm operating with any formal program at all. If you're going to say that that's all that my understanding is, you're in effect begging the question. It's a circular argument. You're assuming what you're supposed to be showing to be the case. So this is Searle's famous Chinese room experiment as applied to artificial intelligence, and it's quite an interesting one to consider.